On 12th of June 2025, an Indian airline flight 171 Boeing 787 bound for Gatwick, London from Ahmedabad crashed just 32 seconds after the takeoff. Soon after the crash, a preliminary report came out. The cause of crash was revealed as twin engines failure, and the both engines failure was attributed to the flipping of the fuel control switches to the fuel cut-off position. Some aviation experts and the pilots on different forum concluded that the flipping of fuel switches from fuel run position to fuel cut-off position was a deliberate act of one of the pilots of the AI flight 171. In simple words, what these experts are saying means, in an implied way, that it was an act of suicide murder. This directly puts blame on the pilots for committing this wicked act. Let's briefly see how the fuel control switches are operated. These switches are not possible to flip on their own from one position to the other due to any turbulence or shocks, because the toggle lever of these switches is held in position firmly with the help of two features. These features are designed for safe operation of the fuel control switch, which are 1. A physical obstacle or a mechanical catch, or also called as the locking feature in the FAA documents. The two protruding lobes, which are in the lever base and in the top ring of the switch neck, do interlock. These lobes mechanically interlock with each other and function as a mechanical catch or the locking feature. 2. Spring loading of the lever. The levers in these switches have a retaining spring inside, and so the switches are toggled with a spring-loaded lever. In order to flip the switch from one fuel position to the other, the lever has to be manually pulled outwards against the tension force of the spring and moved over the mechanical catch towards the other fuel position and released where the spring pulls the lever inwards firmly into the detent or the mechanical catch. This is how the fuel control switch is flipped from fuel cutoff to fuel run position. And this is how the fuel control switch is flipped from fuel run to fuel cutoff position. In 2018, the Federal Aviation Agency USA, FAA, issued a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, or SAIB, in which it was stated that in some models of the aircraft, the fuel control switch has the potential for disengagement of the locking feature, and Boeing 787-8 is one among those models. Interpreted mechanically, this indicates that if the locking feature of the fuel control switch becomes impaired, the switch may not remain securely in its selected position and could be susceptible to unintended flipping or movement due to external disturbance, such as airframe vibration or turbulence, without the pilot's action. This was only an information bulletin and not a mandatory directive requiring airlines to implement any remedy. However, this bulletin was based on sound reasoning that the switches might flip if the locking feature, which is a mechanical detent together with a spring, is disengaged, which logically implies that if the locking feature is disabled, the switches can flip due to vibration, leading to in-flight engine shutdown. Exactly as the preliminary report mentions that the fuel control switches moved to the cutoff position. A pilot asked the other why he cut off the fuel supply, and he responded that he did not. Both local and international experts expressed their opinion that one of the pilots had deliberately flipped the switches from fuel run position to fuel cut-off position, leading to a horrifying crash that took so many lives. This paints the pilots as devilish instead of innocent. Well, if the pilots can commit this horrific act, then why not? Instead of the pilots, it may have been an act by somebody else, who may have had access to the cockpit in privacy with full authority on the controls of the aircraft. And given the fact that the mechanically sound functioning switches cannot move on their own as they are spring-loaded, the only possibility remaining is that somebody else with access to the cockpit may have tampered with the switches in a way that they would flip on their own during the flight. So let's assume that the pilots are innocent. As one asked, "Why did you do that?" And the other replied, "I didn't." And assume that the working fuel control switches were actually replaced with tampered switches by some other crew who had full access to the cockpit and all the controls therein. We know that the same aircraft arrived at Ahmedabad Airport as Air India Flight 423 at 11:17 a.m. and departed the gate as Air India Flight 171 at 1:10 p.m. In between this time span, a pilot defect report, PDR, was completed by aircraft maintenance engineers crew, and the aircraft was released at 12:10 p.m., followed by arrival of the pilots at around 12:40 p.m. This timeline allows enough time for someone to carry out this replacement of working fuel switches with the tampered switches. Let's see how the switches may have been tampered with before bringing them into the cockpit to replace the good, functional switches. If the spring inside the fuel control switch that holds the lever in position is removed or broken, then the lever can jump off its restraining detent or the mechanical catch, referred to as the locking feature in the FAA's bulletin, where it is normally held in place under the tension of the spring. If somebody brings such tampered switches with removed spring to the cockpit and replaces the installed working switches with those tampered switches, then the scenario of a malicious act is set up. The working switches and the tampered installed switches look alike, so the pilots normally won't feel any difference when they operate these tampered switches. Before examining how the tampered switches can actually be a reason of this incident, let's first examine different orientation and levels of the switches. The face and the base of the switches are parallel, and the levers, whether in fuel run or fuel cut-off position, are at an angle to the face or base of the switches. These fuel control switches are installed as considerably slanted in the flight console, so the base of the switches is at an angle with the horizontal reference or the cockpit floor. With this slanted installed orientation, the center line of the levers, when in fuel run position, are also intersecting the vertical reference line at an angle such that the levers are deflecting towards the fuel cutoff position under the effect of gravity, although held in place by the mechanical catch or the locking feature. In actual, it looks like this. The switches are installed at an angle. Let's understand how the locking feature or the mechanical catch works. This is the fuel control switch. We will take a sketch of only a part of it that makes up the locking feature, or the mechanical catch as within the red circle. So this is a sketch of the neck of the fuel control switch. This small protuberance on the neck ring is lower lobe of the locking feature, or the mechanical catch, and this is the lever of the fuel control switch. This small protuberance on the lever bottom is the upper lobe of the mechanical catch. In either position of the lever, as fuel run or fuel cut-off, both lobes are interfaced so they are interlocked, and it forms a mechanically restrictive lock or mechanical catch, which is termed as the fuel control switch locking feature in FAA's official documents. And this locking feature prohibits the movement of the lever accidentally or on its own, effectively when together under tension of the lever spring. It is important to examine the effectiveness of the locking feature with regard to the slope of the mechanical catch. We have already seen this is the sketch of the interlocking lobes. Let's examine the switch neck lobe, which is in the top ring of the neck of the fuel control switch, which is this one. This line represents the steepness of the mechanical restriction due to neck lobe or the slope of the mechanical catch. We will see its importance soon. We have seen that with the slanted installation of the fuel control switches in the console, the levers in fuel run position are tilted at an angle and are deflecting towards fuel cut-off position under gravity. However, they are held in place due to the inward pulling force of the spring. With the slanted installation, not just the levers, but the lobes interlock is also slanted, resulting in a reduced angle of steepness of the slope and making the interlock less effective. This is the mechanical catch interlocking, as we already saw, with the slope when the switch is not installed. As soon as the switch is installed in the console at a slanted angle, this slope reduces by as much as the angle of slant of the switch installation. Let's one more time see in side-by-side comparison of all the angles of mechanical catch and the levers in both uninstalled and installed conditions while on ground. This is the fuel control switch in fuel run position before installation. This is the fuel control switch in fuel run position after the installation, slanted at an angle not less than 45 degrees with reference to the horizontal or the cockpit floor on the ground. Note that the slope of the mechanical catch has reduced by the same amount as the angle of slanted installation while the aircraft is on the ground. Let's compare how the levers are tilted. This is the tilt of the lever before installation in the fuel run position. This is the tilt of the lever in fuel run position after installation, slanted at an angle not less than 45 degrees with reference to the horizontal or cockpit floor on ground. Note that the lever is tilted towards the fuel cutoff side and has a tendency to deflect to the fuel cutoff position under the effect of gravity. However, the lever does not move uncommanded since it is held in position firmly with the spring we already have seen, as well as the restriction from the mechanical catch. Up until now, we have seen enough of how the fuel control switch is installed at a slanted position, due to which we have seen that the slope of mechanical catch is reduced from steepness towards flattening. We have seen how the lever of the switch in fuel run position is tilted towards the fuel cutoff position. However, despite all of this, the switch is held firmly in position with the help of the spring in the lever. Let's examine the cause and effect correlation between different angles associated with the fuel control switch lever and the aircraft nose pitch level while on the ground and while taking off. This is the conceptual illustration of the slanted installed switch with the retaining spring in the lever. It is in fuel run position on ground. The lever is tilted towards the fuel cutoff position. Due to this tilt, the lever is under the effect of the force of gravity towards the cutoff position. This force of gravity can be divided into two rectangular force components. This force component can flip the lever towards cutoff position. Now, as the aircraft leaves the ground, during the takeoff, the nose pitches up. The angle of tilt of the lever is increased, which increases the force component of the gravity that is exerted on the lever towards the cutoff position. The angle of slope of the lock feature is further reduced, which makes the steepness of the lock feature even less effective. During this nose pitch up, any jolt due to turbulence can flip the lever towards the cutoff position. However, the strong inward pulling force of the spring in the lever keeps the lever firmly in the fuel run position. Let's now see how these angles of slope and tilt would change when the aircraft is taking off from the runway. This is the aircraft rolling on the runway for takeoff. At VR speed, the aircraft rotates and pitches the nose up by minimum 10 and maximum 15 degrees. The fuel control switch lever tilt increases, and the angle of slope of the lock feature also reduces by as much as a minimum of 10 and maximum 15 degrees. The aircraft lifts off and continues for a few seconds. Then it pitches up further by minimum 5 degrees. At this point of takeoff, there are three conditions that are present, which are 1. The lever tilt towards the cutoff is maximum. 2. The gravity force component exerted on the lever is maximum. 3. The slope angle of the lock feature is also the minimum or least effective. Here, at this very specific point of the takeoff, turbulence can knock off the lever lobe to go over the switch neck lobe because the steepness is excessively flattened, and this can cause the lever to move towards the cutoff position. However, the robust design of the switch ensures it remains firmly in fuel run position, and it does not move since the spring holds the lever firmly in position even during extreme turbulence and the nose pitch up angle. Now, as we discussed, if these switches were tampered by removing the retaining spring, so at this stage of takeoff, due to the turbulence, with all the three conditions present, the lever will jump off the lock feature detent like this, because almost flattened slope of angle is offering least physical obstruction. Then this force arm, we already know, will pull the lever to the fuel cutoff position uncommanded. Both fuel control switches move to fuel cutoff position likewise with a gap of 1 second. The gap of 1 second between the flipping of switches is just incidental, and it could have been simultaneous, or one after the other in any order, with a gap of a little less or a little more time than 1 second. This 1 second gap has no relevance. The harsh reality is that the tampered switches flipped to the fuel cutoff position this way. Then what happened horrifically is what the world has seen in shock. We firmly believe that the design of the fuel control switches is robust, and these switches will hold their position in any slanted installation and severity of turbulence or accidental hit. We are not putting any blame on any crew, neither the pilots nor any other staff with access to the cockpit. Our viewpoint is a mere highlighting of one another possibility. Why we believe in this possibility is because of 3 reasons. As one, our findings and analysis are consistent with the Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin issued by FAA in 2018. 2, the flooding of the avionics bay or the computer bay of the Boeing 787-8 may shut down the engines, but such flooding will never flip or move the switches, because the fuel control switches are not electromagnetic for movement of the levers. 3. This type of tampering with the switches would show its detrimental effect of shutting down the engines exactly at the same position of the takeoff, where it happened, according to the preliminary report. Our hearts go out to the victims of this air crash and their families.